So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Massy Live webinar series brought to you by the MyPulse team. The Pulse Initiative represents our collective approach to employee well-being across Massy, bringing together webinars like this, digital tools like MyPulse, wellness challenges, and ongoing activities designed to support you in living healthier, more balanced lives. We're happy to have employees joining us from across our territories: Barbados, Colombia, Guyana, Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, and the USA. Thank you for taking the time to invest in your well-being. Each month, we spotlight a key wellness theme, and for this month, our focus is financial and occupational wellness, encouraging us all to build healthy financial habits, improve money management skills, support work-life balance, and prioritize our overall well-being. Today's webinar is titled Pulse Check: Your Money, Your Habits, Your Future, featuring Gail Roberts. As we navigate an ever-changing financial landscape, building healthy money habits and improving financial awareness is more important than ever. Today's discussion will provide practical guidance on money management, budgeting beyond financial and monthly expenses, and identifying spending patterns to help us make more informed financial decisions and support our overall well-being. Today, as I mentioned, we're joined by Gail Roberts. Gail is an actuarial consultant with over 20 years of experience in the pensions industry, specializing in retirement planning, pension consulting, and financial well-being. She's passionate about helping people better understand money management, personal finance, and retirement preparedness through seminars, workshops, and consulting sessions. Please join me in welcoming Gail Roberts.
Good morning, everyone. As Tony Ray would have said, I am Gail Roberts, and it really is a pleasure to be with you all this morning. I am always very happy when employers take the time, to invest in employees in areas that matter to us just in life in general, and not just in work. Now, before we go any further, I just need to give you my disclaimer. Essentially, this is a long way of saying that this is not personal financial advice. It's not a contractual arrangement. We're doing things at a general level. So while it is information that will allow you to improve on your financial journey, it's not professional financial guidance. It's just general information that you can use. Now, going back to why I really like, why I really enjoy these sessions is that when we think about it, we all have to interact with money in some form or fashion on a daily basis. And if you think back to your very first paycheck, let's say, and I know some of us going to have to think back, a little further than others, did that paycheck come with instructions? Generally it didn't. And so what happens is that even though we've done, let's pass primary school, but we've done secondary school, we've done university, some people have gone on to do masters and PhDs, etc. And we do all of that. And within all that time, nobody actually, for the most part, some people did have, parents who would give them money guidance, but that's not very usual because we tend not to talk about money, at that level in the home. So we grow up, we become adults, and somehow, we're magically supposed to understand how to manage money, and it doesn't really work like that. So what happens is that we learn as we go. And, for me, sometimes it's very interesting. So I remember like when my children were younger, I would say, but every little gadget, every toy, everything comes with some set of instructions. And yet something as important, as significant as money management, we just left to kind of figure it out. And when we have to learn as we go, inevitably what that means is that we're going to make mistakes. And with that normally comes some sense of frustration for some people. In some cases, guilt when you make the mistakes. Sometimes there's disappointment, shame, all kinds of emotions that come up with it. But the really good part about money management is that I find that similar to, let's say, playing an instrument or when you're learning to drive, it's something that you can learn once you put the practice in. And with money management, I have found that just just adding some little changes, making some little tweaks, you immediately start to see and feel the difference of the effort you're putting in. So regardless of where you are, it is not too late to start. And that is why I really like, being a part of these sessions. So let's chat a little bit about what we're going to do today. We're going to start by talking about personal finance at a general level. We're going to zero in on money management, which is really our focus for today. But we're going to spend most of the time actually talking about you. Where are you on this journey? And then what are some of the things that we can do to move us from becoming aware, which is what we want to do in the first few parts, to action? Because until we get to the action part, we're not really doing the work. So let's start with personal finance. What's personal finance in the first place? So I like to think of it as the process of managing, and notice I put it in caps, your money and financial decisions in a way that supports, again, your life, responsibilities, goals, and futures. And the reason that I put the your in caps there is that personal finance is just that. It's personal. So it's not about everybody else, your friends, your cousins. It's not about that. It's about you. And what we have to realize is that we're all different. And even if you have two people earning the very same income, their personal finance decisions are very likely to be very different, because here's what: we're at different ages. We're at different stages in life. We have different family structures and, by extension, different family obligations. We have different goals, different aspirations. We have different issues, different things that we're working on. So when you put all of that into perspective and you focus on what pertains to you, we're all very different. So as we go through today's session, I want you to have that at the back of your mind at all times, that this is about you and your financial journey. Now, technically, personal finance is made up of, you could almost say that first, personal finance is like an umbrella with different spokes coming out, and money management is just one aspect of that. And I'll talk a little bit more about your My Pulse app later on, where you may have information on a lot more of these issues or topics. But for today, we're going to be focusing on money management, and the savings will come in there a little bit. So let's talk now about what is money management. And that's essentially the day-to-day aspect of it, what we're doing every day with our money. How the money comes in, how it's spent, which is normally the tricky part, and how we allocate it towards responsibilities, goals, and the future needs. So before we go on, I want you to tell me in the chat, Tony Ray, if you could just share the responses with me as you see them, what influences how you manage your money? What, as just think about it on a day-to-day basis as you go out, when you go to malls, or you go shopping, or you're doing your online banking. What do you think influences how you manage your money?
All right. Someone has needs versus wants.
Say that again, Tony.
Needs versus wants.
Mm-hmm.
Another response: retirement income.
Mm-hmm.
The urgency of a credit.
Mm-hmm.
retirement and savings? Will I be able to retire comfortably?
Okay, so I'm getting some very, very responsible answers here.
Yes.
Well, these answers sounded very, future focused and, really about managing money.
Not going into debt is another response.
Say that was the last one, Tony.
Not
going into debt. Okay, like I said, these answers are sounding very, very responsible, and I like that. But what I have found is that money management has two sides to it. There's the side that we're very accustomed to, meaning the practical side. So when we talk about creating a budget, which we'll talk about more in a little while, things about tracking your spending less than you earn, saving, those are the things that we tend to focus on when we think about how we manage our money. But I want to put it to you that money management has another side, very, very present, but we tend not to think about it too much or focus on it. And that's what we call the behavioral side. In other words, your money mindset, which is your unique set of beliefs, habits, attitudes, and emotions around money. And whether or not we think we have them, I promise you that you do. And so we want to touch a little bit on the whole topic of your money mindset. Now, nowadays we have financial psychologists, and what they have said is that these are the ways in which we are conditioned. But what I have found is that this is correct, but it's not just about money. I have found that these things that we're going to talk about here, I find they affect every aspect of our lives, and money is just one of them. So how are we conditioned? It's about, they refer to it as verbal programming. What did you hear about money when you were growing up? So for those of us in Trinidad and Tobago, we might hear things like, money don't grow on trees, etc. I know that some people regularly misinterpret this particular part of the Bible about easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man, right? And these things, even though we may not think about it that way, they really guide what we do later on. Also, what did you see? For example, if you grew up in a home where money was scarce, it affects how you deal with money after. If your parents were very responsible with money, it may set you in that same stead. If you grew up where every time you ask for something, it was a story about we don't have enough, those things stay with you and guide how you handle money after. Specific incidents as well. I've seen that where children experience a lot of fighting about money, there's some money issues there, and also there's sometimes how people got the money. So I remember one time chatting with somebody who came into money through, I think, like somebody passing, but the experience of the person passing, had a big effect on how they felt about the money and whether they should use the money and whether they should have the money. So I really find that, we have to pay attention to the behavioral side of it. And sometimes, people would ask, but Gail, which is the right way and which is the wrong way? And where this is concerned, I don't think that there are any rights or wrongs. I think the key when we coming to thinking about what is our mindset about money is whether or not the beliefs and the habits and the emotions that we have behind money, whether they're serving us, whether they're helping us to get where we want to be. And one of the keys here is to really, pause long enough to give yourself time to, stop and realize, okay, why am I interacting with money in this particular way? For example, when you sit down at your laptop, let's say you pay your bills online, what you're feeling inside when you're paying those bills, or when, let's say, when you sit down to budget, for example, because I know many people have have budgeting anxiety. When you sit to budget, I know a lot of people tell me they feel a type of way. Just last week, somebody was telling me, every time they sit down to, figure out how the budget is going to work, they say they get vexed, real vexed. And, this is the reality. But like I said, it's not really about right or wrong. It's about becoming aware of why we feel what we feel, and then seeing how we could switch that so that we interacting with money in a way that can serve us. And a lot of times during the day, you'll hear me talking about things that are serving you, because that's what we want. That's what we want the money to do. Now we're going to move on to talk about budgeting. And before we get into it in any depth, I want you all to tell me, just again, you can put in the chat and Tony will let me know if you respond, how you feel about budgeting. When you think about sitting down to do your budget, when you're looking at your budget, what sort of feelings come up for you?
One response so far, it's a bit overwhelming trying to start.
Overwhelming, yes. I see that often, overwhelming.
Clarity. The responses come in. Clarity, disappointment. It feels good because it helps control spending. Stress, depression, another stressed, excited, anxiety, frustrated. I like to see that there are funds after paying bills. Just glad to pay my bills, one less thing to worry about.
All right, so you will realize that within these responses, we kind of have the full range from the frustration, etc., to the people who are seeing that, okay, this is giving me clarity. I'm seeing where the money is going. And that really is a journey, because once upon a time, I too had an issue, believe it or not, with budgeting. Now, the interesting thing was that I did it, I had my budget and I would spend accordingly. But one day I was like, well, why do I know what I do and I'm handling the money, but why do I feel like this every time I sit down to do this? And one day, while actually doing a program on something else not very related, I realized that I always saw the budget as restrictive. In other words, I can't do what I want to do. And that really came from something with me in childhood, where every time I asked my father for something, and to me, they would be very reasonable things, like the teacher said, this would be a very good book to have in A-levels, etc. And I'm telling you all, every response was, that's not any budget, that's not any budget, that's not any budget. So I realized what it was, and I was able, to handle it. But I really understand that full gamut of emotions when it comes to budgeting. But as I said, once we start practicing, becoming aware, you will realize, once you do the work, that you will start to shift from the anxiety and the how overwhelming it is, to seeing it as it giving you clarity and showing you what you want to do with your money. So I know that Tony Ray would have, or somebody in wellness would have distributed a sample budget. So all of us know that it's essentially a statement of income and expenditure. So what we do the income part first, which is normally the easy part. And so we will list all income, take out taxes, deductions, etc., so that we start with net income. Then we look at all our expenses. So we list all the expenditure, and then we do income minus expenditure, and that would help us to determine whether we have a budget surplus, which means income is greater than expenditure, or if we have a budget deficit, in which case expenditure is greater than income. I don't know if you all had a chance to do it, and based on what I'm hearing, I know that some of you already budget. But based on the one that Tony Ray would have given you, I just want us to touch a little bit on some of the items in the budget. Things like there's some utility bills that you won't get them every month. Like, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, water rates and our electricity bill, we wouldn't get them monthly, in which case you take an average. Similarly, if, depending on whether you have a set phone plan or not, your phone bill may not be the exact same thing every month, but what you do is you put an average of what it normally is. There are some little tips in there, things that things that we know, but I'm just going to mention. When we're doing grocery shopping, for example, always, I know we hear it all the time, always very good to go with a list. And I have learned to check the cupboard and the fridge before I go. Because one of the things that I heard someone say a long time ago, is that when we go into the supermarkets, and this is Massy, you all would know, they refer to these supermarkets as having aisles of temptation, because of course there would be a lot of research that goes into human psyche that will determine where things are placed, where things are positioned in the groceries, the necessities might be down to the back, so we have to pass some of the other things at the front, etc. And there's nothing wrong with that. I always say that, the businesses are they're minding their business. So we need to also mind ours. So, again, like I said, it's all about your particular set of circumstances. So for example, once upon a time, I used to do monthly groceries, which is when the children were younger, you're cooking all the time, that type of thing. My children are now 20 something at university, living abroad. I have nothing called monthly groceries anymore. I simply buy what I am going to cook in the next few days. That's all I do now. And of course, the grocery bill is entirely and totally different because it's just two of us now, right? And like I said, I only buy exactly what I need. So again, about your particular set of circumstances. So you look at all the items and see how you can manage those items a little better. There's some things that are straightforward, things like contributions to annuities, if you have mortgage, rent, etc. Some things are just what they are, but there are other items on the budget, especially like when you have plans and subscriptions, etc. Those things that you are using, are you actually using all the features of this plan, and whether it would be better to get, a less expensive plan. And again, it all depends on how flexible or how rigid your budget is, how much you really need to stick to the income line, or seeing that you already have some, space, some excess to work with. But I want you all to tell me, having looked at the budget, did you add anything else to it? Did you find anything else anything else to add to that budget listing, those expense items that wasn't on my list? Anything else that you spend money on that wasn't on my list?
Someone has savings.
Okay, savings. I like that. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Yes, you can have savings on your budget. Anything else?
Self-care.
Self-care.
Entertainment.
Right, I think entertainment was there.
Investment. Donations.
Investment. What was the last one, Tony?
Donations.
Okay.
Someone isn't sure, but she's mentioning travel.
Travel, okay. But there are some other things. There's some other things that we spend money on. All of us do it. And because we don't spend them on a monthly basis, they tend to not be in the budget. And I'm talking here about things like car insurance, lots of things to do with the car insurance, the maintenance, the fact that we have to change the tires ever so often. Then you have things like annual doctor checkups, dental checkups, even though you may be able to be claim part of it through your group health plan. Then we have birthdays and anniversaries and Valentine's Day and Christmas and weddings and all these kinds of things that we spend money on, but they're not in the budget. So what a lot of people experience is that even though they have a monthly budget that they work with, when they look at the bank balance at the end of the month, they're not looking like what the budget showing. And that's because there are a lot of other things happening that we spend money on that we do add to the budget. So I want us to talk about an exercise that I want to encourage you to do to sharpen up the budget a bit. And this is what I call budgeting, or you could call it allocating for non-monthly expenses. So in your particular set of circumstances, identify what are those things that you know you spend money on, but it's not in your monthly budget. So I gave the example of the vehicle stuff. So we're going to start with that. So you identify what it is. In this instance, let's say it's some tires for the vehicle. And I am just going to use random numbers. Of course, you will use what pertains to you. And let's just say these tires are going to cost $2,700 when I buy them. However, I'm not buying these tires every month, as we know. I'm saying I'm going to need tires on average every 18 months. So what I then do, I take 2,700 divided by 18. That gives me $150. So I am saying that on average, $150 out of my monthly salary every month put aside will help me to have the money for the tires when I need them. Another example I have here is vehicle insurance. So I'm going to assume now that that is $5,400 a month, and I'm paying the vehicle insurance every year, and that comes to $450. So you're basically doing the same thing for all the items. I just want to know if so far you're following what I did with these non-monthly expenses. If you have any questions, just shoot it in the chat, please. All right, so it looks like we're good. So when you repeat this for a number of different expenses that we occur at some point in the year, but not on a monthly basis, it could look something like this. And then you realize that on average, of course, it's not every month, but on average, we're spending about $2,700 a month in addition to what we already have in the budget. Once you've done this exercise, the recommendation then is that you take this $2,700 and add it as a line item in your budget. So now the expense total on your budget will go up by this amount. So in an instance, for example, where we had somebody with an income of $20,000 with $15,000 in expenses, so showing a budget surplus of $5,000, when we add in the non-monthly expenses, the expenses have gone up, and so of course the surplus has gone down. Similarly, if we have somebody where the budget was already in deficit, when we add the non-monthly expenses, of course, the deficit is going to go up even more. Now, I want to pause there to say that, remember, we want to put aside this money so that when we need it for all these different eventualities, we will have it. And one of the things that we need to abide by with all things money management is to thine own self be true. There are some of us if we have the, we budget for the extra $2,700 and we leave it in the bank account that we use on a regular basis, the money will not stay in the account because, there's something about just how the human mind and system works. And for some people, once that extra money is there, they will find things to do with it. So it's often recommended that that extra money, you put it in a separate account. So you put that $2,700 in a separate account so that whenever one of these things come up, you go to that account. So sometimes people, yes, we have emergencies, and we're going to talk about that a little later. But sometimes what people are calling emergencies are not really emergencies. It's just something that you didn't plan for. It's something that you know will happen. We just don't know exactly when we might need to spend the money. For example, when a car battery dies, I always think that the car battery should tell you a week before that I am dying. But when a battery dies, when we need to replace the battery, no. But we know at some point, especially when the warranty is like 18 months, we know in about 18 months-ish, the battery may die. You have money for your vehicle maintenance put aside. And so when the battery dies, that's not an emergency. It is something that you have planned for. So you just go to your next account or transfer the money to your credit card, etc., and you do what you need to do. Make sense?
Yes.
Correct. So let's talk a little bit now about, so we understand what we're doing for ourselves. Is it different when we're budgeting for the household? So essentially, the basic steps are the same, might have more income streams and definitely more expenses when you're looking at more than one, right? But not necessarily more income streams if you are the only breadwinner in the family. But the key thing about when you have to add other people, the key thing is communication. You need to take time to discuss and understand each other's priorities. It's wonderful if you can agree on short and long-term goals and be willing to compromise, because there's something about money in general. Like I said, it's brings up lots of emotions. And when you have more than one person involved, it can get a little testy if you don't agree. So as far as possible, you want to make sure that you spend time communicating about, this is the money, these are the expenses, this is what we agreed to do, so that you can move towards your goals and priorities. Now, some other tips. Well, this links with what we said before. Where necessary, make it a team effort. Include a buffer, maybe a little extra, depending on your currency, something a little extra just in case you have some little other things to do. I'm not talking about anything major here, especially for people who have children and today's school one Bristol board and tomorrow they need something else, etc. I like to include a little buffer in the budget. Now, somebody mentioned savings and investment in a budget. Yes. So I like to call that budgeting to zero. In other words, give every dollar a task. So this is how much you're going to save. This is how much you're going to invest, so that when you've actually allocated all the money, it comes to a zero budget, because like I said, it's not that you're spending all the money, but that you've allocated all the money somewhere. The next one is very important. Know your bill dates and make a payment schedule. Why is that so important? What happens when we forget the bill date? We're going to end up sometimes paying late fees and penalties, which is just eating, it's what we call an unnecessary leakage in your finances. And then track your expenses, which we're going to talk about in some more detail in a bit. As far as possible, and again, it depends on whether it works for you. But I find that automating spending and saving helps. So where there are things that you know you're going to have to pay every month on like clockwork, if you can automate it, and similarly, if you can do some sort of standing order where your savings is concerned, the money comes out, you don't think about it. Really, after a while, you just get so accustomed to it. I actually have a friend who, when they started working a long time ago, they did a standing order for $1,500 a month. And even though as they grew in their career, they were saving otherwise, this $1,500 was coming out and they almost didn't notice it until one day when they looked at the statement and that had crossed $1 million because of how long they had been doing it. And that's what automation does. You don't have to think about it all the time, and it's just easy on the brain. It gets the job done. Another thing we're going to talk about in some more detail: use a system that works for you. Whether you want to use an online app, Excel, envelope system, my thing is whatever works for you. And I know that there are people who use the envelope system. There are even some apps that mirror the envelope system. And in case anybody you're not familiar with the envelope system, this is where once people have determined what they're going to spend for what, they literally have an envelope, rent, groceries, different envelopes with the money that is allocated for that in it. And when the money in that envelope is done, they are also done with that for the month until another sort of income comes in and you start over. Give yourself grace. Now, remember I said in the beginning that this, the whole issue of money management is not something that we knew from small. We're learning as we go, and yes, we will make mistakes. Now, we don't want to keep repeating the mistakes, but when you don't get it right the first time or the second time, give yourself some grace, but you're working on it to get to a better place. And I happen to be very big on happiness. To me, you come into work, you're doing what you have to do, you have other responsibilities, etc. Life has to be about more than that. There must be some joy in it. So include things, I always say include things that bring you joy. And again, that's a very personal thing. And things that bring you joy don't necessarily have to cost money or be expensive. For some people, going to the beach, so the extra gas, whatever, on a weekend, that brings them joy. For some people, is going to see a movie once a month or go out to eat once a month, whatever it is that brings you joy and you can fit any budget. Try to include something, that lifts your spirit and, just energizes who you are as a human being. So I said before, we want to spend some time talking about tracking expenses, which I always say is the more quote unquote fun side of the budget, because the income side is very straightforward. The expenses side is where all the excitement takes place. So why we want to track expenses in the first place? Now, if we don't track the expenses, then we cannot see where the money is going. And the other thing here linked to the budget is that if we don't document this, like I said, regardless of whether it's on paper, an app, Excel, etc., what we think is happening when we think we budgeting in our minds is not really what's happening in practice. So it's really key. In order to get clarity, you need to actually see where the money is going. The other thing tracking allows us to do is to categorize our expenses. So for example, in my instance, I have used, my categories go something like utilities, groceries, eating out is a separate category, transport, entertainment, things to do with children, etc., etc. So based on your set of circumstances, of course, you may have other categories. And once we have the categories now, and we look at those totals in comparison with what we itemized in the budget, it allows us to identify our spending patterns, because sometimes you say, I didn't know I was spending so much money on X or Y. And you also find, as I mentioned before, where there might be leakages in how you manage money. For example, and this has happened to me, I don't know if it has happened to you. Have you ever subscribed for something with good intentions of just using it for this, it's a small subscription fee, but it's something that could really help you in what you're doing now. And so you subscribe with good intentions that you are going to end the subscription before the month is up and you need to pay again. And then you get a notification on your phone that X dollars was just debited, just charged to your credit card. And you're like, who is that? And when you check, you realize it has happened to me. So you want to make sure you're not paying for things that you're not using, where you need to put a post-it on your laptop, cancel this, cancel that on this date, that type of thing, so that you're not giving away money unnecessarily. Another place that I had to make a change, for example, was in my TV internet bundle, because I watch very little to no TV. So that, there's Netflix and Amazon Prime and stuff. So I really watch almost zero television. So having this bundle wasn't really working for me. So you make the necessary changes and you save a couple $100. As I mentioned before, use whatever system works for you. And we're going to talk about some apps in a little bit. But very, very important, again, depends on your personality. Try not to aim for perfection immediately. What we want is to begin with awareness, because what you find is that when you're aiming for perfection, you always feel that you're not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. So you don't, spend the time and do the work because you're waiting for something else to happen for you to be in a place where you're going to be ready, to really track your expenses. So you want to start wherever you are and work with what you have. Any questions so far?
Not seeing any in the chat, no.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some tools that we can use to track our expenses. Now, I happen to absolutely love Excel. My daughter tells me that Excel is my best friend. I cannot begin to tell you the types of things that I have planned using Excel. And similarly, some people like Google Sheets. If you search online, of course, there are myriad of apps. These are three of the very popular ones. Good Budget, there's Wallet by Budget Bakers, and YNAB, which is short for You Need a Budget. And what you will see if you check them out is that each of them, has a particular specialty or caters to a particular type of person. Good Budget, for example, is one of those apps that mirrors the envelope system. Whereas I find that the YNAB one tends to focus more on intentional spending. They take you in that direction. There's one that is very, very visual. So if you're a visual person, visual learner, or, you're just, you know how it is. We respond to different things differently. And of course, because of the time that we are living in now, you can find all kinds of apps, and you can find all the instructions on YouTube. So you could check these if you're app inclined, and all of them have some sort of tutorial on YouTube. The other thing to point out is that they generally all have a free part of the platform, and then there's a paid part. So you look and see if the features on the free part will work for you, and you move accordingly. This is a generation where people are on their phone very, very, very often. So maybe if you want during the day, you make notes on your phone and then you transfer it wherever. If your budget is not, too psychedelic, too fancy, notes on your phone alone might work for you. And listen, there is nothing wrong with good old writing it down if that is what works for you. Whether you want to put it in a notebook, a journal, if you want to put pen to paper, that works that's fine as well. And as I said before, the best system is the system that when you start using it, you find that you're using it consistently and that is working for you. So before we move on, any questions on apps or any other, or maybe anybody could suggest or share with us in the chat what they use to track their expenses.
Nothing in the chat yet.
All right,
Are
nothing
we
in the
tracking
chat.
our expenses, guys? Maybe
Was that
we
Tony?
aren't. No, I'm saying maybe we aren't.
Okay.
Okay, one person said they're using an Excel spreadsheet.
All right, Excel like me. Okay.
Excel, my brain. Google Sheets, my brain. Choosing an app can be very overwhelming. I agree. Excel budget template, money manager app on Google Play Store. Excel.
Right. Okay. And like I said, the important thing is that you're using something that works for you. So in my case, for example, because I work on Excel all the time, once I sit down at the laptop and I think for me, I would hardly, I'm not always on the phone, using apps, etc. So Excel works for me. Important thing, like I said, use what is working for you. So having said all of that, I want you to take a couple, like a minute or two, and just write down for yourself, what are the 5 areas where you find your money disappears most quickly? And if you want, you can share 1 or 2 of them in the chat. What are the 5 areas where you find your money disappears most quickly? And I'm not talking here about, now we know the bulk of the money might go towards some, things like rent or mortgage, etc. We know what those are, but I'm talking about money that just, you don't even, it just went before you knew what you were doing. Where you find your money tends to disappear.
Someone has food, and food.
Food and food. I understand that. That's my friend.
Groceries and transport, food and entertainment and eating out, groceries, eating out. My daughter, somebody responded and said they use pen and paper for budgeting. House repairs and improvements, miscellaneous expenses that just pop out of nowhere. Groceries, frivolous purchases at Price Mart, food, miscellaneous spending, eating out, fast food, bills and more bills, buying nice things for my daughter, food, self-care, travel. Oh, travel is another one. Another food as well.
All right. So that food, especially
Food
eating
and
out,
fuel.
food and more food tends to be a thing. But
I'm seeing
again,
Pennywise as well.
so I heard a couple of things in there that, are fundamental parts of your budget, things like your regular bills, right? So we have to make sure we have those. But we really wanna pay attention to the things that we don't really budget for. Now, sometimes what it means is that, especially when you start to track your expenses, if this is something that's reoccurring, it's probably something that you need to see where you could fit it into the budget because it's something that you're doing regularly, or whether it's something that you just need to, sort of restrict yourself from doing. And I'll give you an example. I've had somebody chat with me about, for example, going out, go out with friends, and at the end of the meal or whatever, there's a divvy of the bill by how much ever people. When you have people at the table who probably ate $600 worth of food and you ate $100 worth of food, right? Of course, I'm not saying don't line with your friends, but you have to find a way to make that work if it doesn't, really fit into your budget. Now, for me, any line I organize that is Dutch, I take the responsibility. I calculate everybody's bill and everybody pays their part. However, we do it at the end of the night. So everybody pays for just what they do. But sometimes, people feel within their social groups, feel a lot of pressure, in instances like this, where you can't really afford to be spending the extra $300-400 for something that you didn't eat. So, you have to decide how you manage things like this because let me tell you, little things add up very, very quickly. Another thing that I find that tends to work, especially when Tony Ray mentioned, somebody said about picking up frivolous things in price match, right? One of the things that I have done over the years is I might see something, it appeals to me. I didn't plan to buy this, I will leave it alone. If I find after a while, all right, okay, I'm seeing the need for this, or I really want this. Sometimes it might just be a shoe that I saw and I really like it. So I think about it, look and see, how the money looking. And sometimes you realize 2, 3 weeks later, you never even thought about this thing again. Then I really didn't want it, so I leave it alone. But like I said, we also want to add things that, do things that add joy. So you manage it again in terms of what you really like, what you really want to do, and make sure it aligns with that. But what this does, it helps us to become more aware because one of the key issues in money management is to be aware because awareness gives us clarity. And without that clarity, we're not going to move forward in a positive direction in the budgeting journey. Now, we're not going to deal with this in detail right now, but just to add that on this whole stream of tracking expenses, you do have a track your spending challenge, which I'm going to talk about a little more towards the end of today's session. Now, having spoken about, so we talked about the fact that we started with what is personal finance, money management being the day-to-day aspect. We looked at our budgeting. We say we're going to try to track the expenses, which gives us, once we do it, it should give us a lot of clarity and direction in terms of what is actually happening. What are we actually doing with the money? Now, I just want to add here that even if you are already budgeting or if you are now starting, it's very good either way to track your expenses. So what I have found is that let's say you're now starting, you do your budget in terms of what you think should be happening. When you actually track your expenses for at least a month, but I find 2, 3 months is best, then you can actually come back to the budget and say, okay, this is more of what is happening in real. Let me adapt the budget to suit and massage it a little more. And for those of you who are already budgeting, it's also instructive, to go back and see if we are doing what we actually plan to do. So again, that we could tweak as necessary. But having done that now, what are we going to do to move us forward? So one of the things we know for sure, is that every dollar has competing demands. And based on our budget, if we look back at the budget, we're going to see items that meet our basic needs, items that define our lifestyle. We talked about savings within the budget. We most likely have some debt to pay off. And then we're also working towards future goals. Now, having said that, it means that somewhere in this process, it's not something we're going to do today, but you have to spend some time deciding what those goals are, whether they're short, medium, long-term goals. And like I said, it's about what pertains to you. For example, there are people who have said to me, when there's certain things they buy, and then you realize 3 months later it still has the label on, still has the tag on or whatever, then you didn't really need or want that. Or people have said they would not have purchased that if nobody else had to see it. So in other words, being pressured by what others expect of you. So all of that you have to manage in the process. Of course, we need to meet the basic needs. We must have food, clothing, shelter. Not necessarily in that order, but we have the basic needs. Always good to be saving. We'll talk about savings some more in a little while. If we have debt, we need to pay that. We're working towards future goals. And what you find is that there tends to be a balancing between current lifestyle needs and the future goals that you have to work out and see, what you want. You have to spend time deciding what the goals are, how badly you want those things, and how to allocate the money so that you could meet them. Sometimes it means giving up a little now so that you can meet the future goals, because as humans, we're living now and things happening now. And because I do a lot of work in retirement, I see it a lot when it's time for people to retire. And what you found happening is that because they were always focusing on the now, not too much was put aside for retirement. So you have to find the right balance between all these competing demands. And like I said, it's going to be different for different people. Along with whatever process you do to actually work on your goals, then you have to make sure that you're matching the money to what's most important to you and your particular set of circumstances. You also want to spend time building stability before growth. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So a lot of times, my initial conversation with somebody or with an entity starts with, Gail, we want to understand how to invest our money. And just want to mention briefly also, we're not going to go into that in any depth here, but there is a distinction that we often don't realize between savings and investment. And savings is the money that we are putting aside to spend sometime in the future. But investments, when we are investing, that's money put aside to grow for us, to provide some sort of growth, whether in the form of income. So we get in an income like interest or dividends, or whether we get in capital appreciation, meaning that the value of the thing is going up. So therefore, our asset base is also growing at the same time. But until you have established stability, we can't really do the investing. And COVID was one of the times where we saw this very, very, very clearly. as soon as many people no longer had an income, the world literally fell apart. There was no more money anywhere else. So you would remember that when we were talking about the non-monthly expenses, I said that in the example that came up to the $2,700, what we want to do is to put that $2,700 a month somewhere in a different savings account, so we're not interfering with it. That is a form of savings because we're putting aside that money with the intention of meeting these different non-monthly expenses when they occur. The second form of savings that you need to have before we move into growth and investment is what is often referred to as an emergency fund. You have to start, now there is an quote unquote, an ideal multiple of expenses that you want to get to, but we have to start somewhere. So let's talk a little bit about what this emergency fund is. The concept behind an emergency fund is that if you were to lose your job and had to be home for a while you're spending time looking for a next job, the experts estimate, some people say 6, some people say 9, but anywhere between 6 and 9 months of living expenses. Notice I said living expenses. So in other words, see that expense side of the budget, you're working towards 6 to 9 times that. Now, you're not obviously not going to do it all at once, but within your budget, you want to put aside savings towards your emergency fund. Now, what that does, it means when things happen, as they will, because as the younger people will say, life is lifing, things will happen. It means that you can pull money from the emergency fund and do what you have to do. When we don't have the stability before growth and we say that we're investing, we put aside money somewhere and we say it's an investment. But then, like I said, life is doing what life does. And so every time something happens, you're breaking some aspect of the investment. And depending on what it is, those things may have penalties for breaking them early, etc. So you want to make sure you put aside money for emergencies, start building that emergency fund. Now, I'm not saying you can't invest at the same time, but make sure that you're putting money towards an emergency fund so that when something happens, you are not pulling from what we're calling investments first. We want to pull from the emergency fund. Make sense? And as I mentioned before, it's not about a perfect plan. We're really looking at small, consistent actions instead of perfect plans. Because one of the things, and I'm sure you may have read it somewhere, when we do things, some of the experts say, when we do something, regularly over a period of time, some say 30 days or whatever, you find that it becomes a habit. So we want the actions to be consistent, which is why I was saying, like when you're tracking your expenses, it's about what allows you to be consistent in your actions more than talking about perfection. So at the end of the day, the goal is not to change everything overnight. As we often say, Rome was not built in a day. Where we are in our personal set of financial circumstances, that didn't happen in a day either. It took time to get where we are, whether we're in a good place or we need to be in a better place. But it's really about becoming more intentional over time as you start to document the expenses and see where the money is going. It works in your psyche, it works with your brain to help you to think more and be more aware and to be more intentional over time. So I want us to chat now about your track your spending challenge, sorry. So I don't know if you've already seen any communication about it, but as part of your internal initiative, now it says May 18th, but that we were supposed to have a session then. But you know now, so the Track Your Spending Challenge has started. And in line with what we have talked about a lot today, it's to help you to know where your money goes. So registration has opened. The challenge is going to run from May 25th to June 7th. Tony Ray, you want to say anything more about this? Are there prizes? Anything else they need to know?
Thank you, Gail. No prizes, just some resources and information to help you based on what Gail would have shared with us today. So just an additional resource to help you when it comes to financial well-being. On the app as well, there are different journeys, healthy habits, and media resources that is in line with what we spoke about today.
All right. And I want to tell you all, I know a lot of times in organizations, we get so accustomed to what is provided for us that we don't understand how fortunate you are. You all are extremely fortunate to have resources like this. In most organizations, if you talk to some of your friends and whatnot, they don't have these resources so easily available. So I want to encourage you to really use the platform. And as Tony Ray was saying, there are additional resources to help you on your financial journey, things that guide you in healthy money habits, and tracking expenses. And you also have different media resources with tips and tools and other forms of educational content there. So you have it. It is very free for you to use. Like I said, you're very, very fortunate. In fact, I find in the whole area of wellness, this organization has done exceptionally well. So I want to encourage you, one, to utilize the challenge, as well as to use the tools that are available to you in the MyPulse platform. So at this point, I'm going to open the floor to any questions that you may have before we close off.
Thank you so much, Gail, for that insightful and practical presentation. I know I'm not speaking for myself when I say that these topics can be very overwhelming and intimidating at times, but today's session has really helped make money management and financial planning feel more practical, relatable, and easier to approach and conquer. Are there any questions? Feel free to drop it in the chat, or if you raise your hand, we'll be able to unmute you.
Thank you. I really look forward to the questions. And I too, at one point, I would sit in sessions and just, they're just too rigid and not very personable. So what I really try to do in the sessions is to present it in a way that I know that I could have received it. So I'm happy to hear that, you're like gleaning some tips from what we have done today.
Definitely. So one comment, this was extremely informative. Thank you. Another thank you for this. One question, any word on retirement planning? Richard, is this in our webinar you're referring to, or what we do at the companies? And Gail is actually the one that does the financial sessions at the company specific sessions as well.
But there are questions for me in there, Tony, right? Or should we just
But he had
asking?
any word on retirement planning. So I'm just
So
trying
I
to
guess that would
clarify
be
what
at her division level.
I'm guessing so. Or I don't know if he wants us to do a webinar on retirement planning. Richard, you could probably clarify and we'll be able to answer you clearly. Any other questions or any questions from anyone? Comments? We did place the feedback form in the chat, so please feel free to complete it so that we get...
We allocated, we assumed you all would have more questions, so we
Real
allocated about
questions.
15 minutes for questions.
Richard said yes, a webinar would be great. Okay,
Okay.
well, thank you, Shelby. 1 second, we'll unmute you. You can unmute now, Shelby.
Thank you. I just wanted to share that I really appreciate the very informative session. And I also appreciate your commentary on tackling it, even if you feel you can't get it perfect the first time, because I think that may have been a hurdle that was causing me to sort of spiral, go from Excel with a loose draft, then go to apps, trying to find an app, start loosely with an app, and then realize I do actually like this. With the envelope method, for example, with Good Budget, I don't like this, but I only realized I did not like it when I started inputting information into it and did not like the format or the way it was requiring me to manipulate the information. And then I sort of lost energy after that because I'd spent so much time putting in information into there and then realized I didn't like it. And so I appreciate the little pep talk, I guess, to get me sort of back on the bicycle and try again. And maybe I'll just stick with Excel and give it a try there. But I do really appreciate that commentary because I think that may have been exactly what was causing me to not really start in substance, trying to get it perfect the first time around, trying to find the perfect app that I want, that I love, trying to get all of my expenses captured when I do my groceries just like you. And so it's a little bit of a teething process. So I appreciate also the recommendation to try it for like a 2-3 months and then tweak it later on when you have a better capture of what it really looks like in practice for you. So I thought those were very practical tips and I really appreciate it and I wanted to share that.
Thank you very much for sharing. I really, really appreciate that. And I just want to add a little something here. One of the other things that I do, so I have what I call my general budget. And I do some special budgets as well. So for example, when I know I have to travel, when I know I have travel coming up, I do a separate budget for travel. So for example, so you start doing your research, the cost of the flight, hotel accommodation, if you need to stay in paid accommodation, some of the activities and whatnot you think you might want to do. And then again, tweak as necessary, because I would have in my mind my upper limit of how much I am spending on this trip. And then I look to see, okay, what deals and they have, what freeness you could go and do, etc. And so I do a separate budget for something like a trip. I've also done separate budgets for things like family reunions and things like that. So like when you have a big thing coming up, you can also do a side budget to manage that separately. So again, so that you stick to what you said you're going to spend.
Thank you again, Shelby. Other comments, very informative session. You got a few of those. One person asked, where can one get more information on financial planning? This was just the start. So there is some information on MyPulse available. Gail, I don't know if on a broader space or from a broader point of view, if you can share any resources that you think would be useful.
So to be quite honest, there's a wealth of information online, but if you could tell me what in particular you think you need, I could probably send something for Tony Ray that she can share. And again, you see what happens is that similar, I think Shelby was the last person who spoke.
Yes.
So similar to what Shelby was saying, what you would find is that, okay, so there are a wealth of books, for example. But similar to what Shelby was saying, not everything appeals to you. Similarly, there are lots of people online and YouTube, and there's some of them I couldn't listen to them for 2 minutes, and some I could listen for an hour, right? So it really depends on what appeals to you and what works for you. So there might be a little bit of trial and error involved to find what, what works for you. And listen, and sometimes it is as simple as, for example, if you're listening to a YouTube video or maybe even an audiobook. For me, there are some audiobooks I cannot listen to after 2 minutes because the voice is grating something in my brain. And I know it's not going to work, so I just leave it alone. So it's really about finding what works for you. So, but there are a lot of free resources now. So you could do some Googling, or if there's something in particular, like I said, that you're searching for information on, or you want to know, or I could send a list of the more popular books, and you could kind of, do a little, how on some of the resources online, you could read the first 2 chapters, etc., and see if the style is appealing to you. Because, like I said, not all styles appeal to me either, and I can't read some of the things. So you can either, like I said, do some Googling, or if you let Tony Ray know exactly what it is you might be looking for.
Well, someone asked something specifically about investments. How can we get assistance with investments? How to start? We understand that it's separate from savings.
So a couple of things. Tony Ray, I don't know if you all have anything in your My Pulse on it, but that is like a whole separate topic. Within Trinidad and Tobago, for people now, let me just ask a question. Is this somebody you're starting afresh now, looking to invest money? Yes.
They didn't mention it, but
So
let's say so. Yes.
2 things
She
I
said
want to
yes.
point you to. If it's beginning investors, you want to look into mutual funds, which most people have now. The benefit of being in a mutual fund is that, well, there are a couple of benefits. One, the name itself, the fact that it is a mutual fund, means that it has been set up for mutual benefit. It works because we have a large number of people who are don't necessarily have large amounts of money to put in, right? However, when I put 500 and you put 500 and lots of other more people put 500, you end up with millions of dollars. And with access to that, you can now get involved in more profitable, for want of a better word, forms of investment than I could do with my $500 alone. So with my $500, I cannot do any property investment or any sort of stock investment, but the fund as a whole can do that. That's one of the benefits of being in a mutual fund, or participating in a mutual fund, I should say. The other thing is that some forms of investment require expertise that the average person doesn't have. So for example, even property investment or maybe stocks and bonds, the average person doesn't know where to start. But when you put your money in a mutual fund, there are investment managers who have been trained in those areas. So they are investing the money on our behalf, doing what we couldn't do. So one, you have the benefit of the large sums of money that can get involved in areas that we can't get in on our own, as well as you have the expertise of the investment managers. The other thing that I would like to point you to are treasury bills. So this is a short-term form of government borrowing that you would see in the papers ever so often. it's really, really, really easy to get involved. I'm not sure if Central Bank now has a way for you to apply online, but how it works is that this is the government borrowing money, and they will say the government is issuing a treasury bill, they'll give you a deadline, and essentially what you do is that you fill out an application form. You say how much money you want to invest and what interest rate you want. Now, there's a system where they then do some analysis with those numbers and come up with an average interest rate. Now, if they accept, if you're, so it's kind of like a bid you're doing, if they accept your application on the basis of the interest rate that you applied for, you get that interest rate. But smaller investors can really dictate interest rate. So you find that for smaller investors, there's something to tick where you will take whatever the average interest rate is. And how it works is that it works at a discount, so that let's just say you want to get $5,000, then it will tell you need to put in 4,005 or whatever, and at the end you get back the 5,000. But you could read up about it some more on the Central Bank website, because Central Bank is the one that handles that. It's really straightforward, and the interest rates are definitely better than anything. I mean, of course, interest rates are falling across the board, but the interest rates are definitely better than anything you're going to get in the bank. And well, in different countries, you will have treasury bills as well. And usually your equivalent of a central bank will also will be handling it. So you want to do some research on whoever is the primary financial statutory body in your country who would be responsible for things to do with government borrowing. But treasury bills is a good place to start off. So two things, like I said, two main things for beginners would be mutual funds and treasury bills.
Thank you so much, Gail.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to ask Christian to share his screen. As Gail mentioned, the Track Your Spending Healthy Habit Challenge is open. But in addition to that, we have some resources right here on the homepage of MyPulse, where you can access information on budgeting, a video on managing financial stress, and the Healthy Habit Challenge that started. So to access it, you can simply visit the social tab at the top, go to challenges, and you'll see the Track Spending Challenge here for you. Christian is already in the challenge, but if you aren't, you'll just see join now right there, and it's easy as that. If you aren't on MyPulse, he would have dropped the sign up link in the chat. So we encourage you to sign up and participate in the challenge as we try to build healthier financial habits together. And as you know, through the Pulse Initiative, there are many opportunities to stay engaged, whether through webinars, challenges, or digital tools. So we encourage you to take full advantage. As a reminder, before you leave, please take a moment to complete the feedback form for this webinar, which is pinned in the chat. Your feedback helps us to continuously improve these sessions. And I want to thank Gail again for her presence, for her practicality and relatability in sharing on this topic. And thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at our next session. Stay well and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks again for having me.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone. Take care.